Hey guys, welcome to episode 9 of the UrbanCred podcast. So today we'll be speaking with Maya Sause. She is living in Japan right now and she does different things. She does some teaching, she does some modeling, she also does uh, some work. She has like a side business going on that she's working on, possibly, and other things that's in her future, near future that we may or may not talk about. But she's definitely very talented, right? And I just wanted to kind of talk to her and see how it was to live in Japan and what it's like to be, an outsider, but not really, because she's been there for I just think a few years already. So let's get right to it. So Maya, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the introduction. I feel feel so much more talented than I think I am, maybe. Yeah, sure. So my name is Maya. I've been living in Tokyo for about 3.5 years now. Originally, I'm from the U.S. I'm from Colorado, represent. And yeah, right now, a lot of what I'm working on is either I'm working at some sort of cram school, and then I also do some design work. I'm working on this little lamp collection I have called Kagami Collection, as well as I do some sort of modeling jobs here and there as well. So I like to be able to have that sort of flexibility and do different things. I'm the type of person, I think, if I try to do one thing for too long, I get really bored.
No,
So
absolutely, I can totally understand that. Are you I'm sorry, where were you based at?
I'm based in Tokyo at the moment.
Okay. And
Hmm.
and I know that being in Tokyo, in Japan in general, actually, it's the experience is for a lot of people who I speak with is quite a bit different compared to like the Western side of the world. Is that something that you've experienced too?
Yeah, I mean, definitely Tokyo is like a major city, so in that sense, it has a lot of similarities to maybe
Mm.
cities like New York or LA, where everyone's trying to like rush and hustle. But I think Tokyo has a much more, I don't know, like I feel like a lot more people in Tokyo tend to work for like large corporations, and definitely the work culture is quite different here as well.
Oh, I see. Can you kind of elaborate on that? Is it like I heard like in Japan there's an emphasis on overworking or
Hmm.
working past what is considered normal in
Hmm.
the U.S. or other countries.
Hmm. Yeah, I think definitely there's a strong culture of overwork here. It's
Uh-huh.
almost, if you join a large company, it's almost expected that you will sell your soul essentially to the
Oh
company.
no.
Um, and I think, especially if you work in a creative industry, I think companies tend to exploit that. They think like, oh, you're doing something fun, so we're going to pay you less and expect you to work more, when in fact you're doing just like a lot of work. I
Right.
think for me personally, I managed to avoid that sort of lifestyle. I knew about that sort of moving to Japan, so that was something I actively tried to avoid. But
Mm.
a lot of my friends, especially those who work in architecture, get caught up in this like 15-hour work days, 6 days a week. Um, they're not paid what they're worth, and they're just not working on creative projects either. And I think that sort of culture, especially if you're younger or working at more entry level, that's is very prevalent throughout a
Mm.
lot of Japan, not just Tokyo.
Wow. So do you think that so why would they, I guess like for me, I'm wondering then why do they bother still going to that? Is it that job? Is it something that it's hard to get a job in Japan, or is it kind of, especially for a foreigner, is it tougher or than the locals, or is it just they're just like they like to kind of be brutal in their lifestyle type of thing?
um, I think, well, it depends. I think for example, for a lot of international or foreign people, they're worried about the visa.
Hmm.
So the work visa, you have to be sponsored by a company, right? And then if you want to get
Mm-hmm.
a different sort of visa, depending on your nationality and where you're from, some visas are harder to get than others. So the freelance visa, it's possible to get, but you kind of have to show and prove a certain type of income, which sort of shows that you have clients in Japan. So people even people who are working for companies maybe in the US and who move to Japan, they wouldn't really even be able to get a visa unless they can prove that they're like being paid by Japanese people, Japanese companies.
Hmm.
So I think there's just a lot of barriers to being able to stay in Japan, and especially in an industry like architecture, for example, you can't just like start your own architecture firm right out of university or anything. Um, so I think that's why a lot of people end up going into these companies, and then they get stuck there, and then it's just sort of hard to break out of that system if you're worried about the visa, and you're working in a field like architecture, and there's not really quite the same culture of um, entrepreneurship, I'd say.
Right.
Not quite so much as in the U.S.
Yeah, I would imagine it's like tougher to actually be an entrepreneur in Japan, especially
Mm-hmm.
if you're a foreigner. And
Mm-hmm.
it's also that I feel like from what you're saying is that it's also that safety, right? Just if you're in working at a company, it's steady. You have guaranteed um, a chance to get that visa and guaranteed pay, and being overseas is the risk is higher in terms of not if you weren't getting paid by a job, then it would be tougher to be able to for your apartment, and it would lead to a whole bunch of other issues. So I guess like from that standpoint, I can totally understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whew, that was actually a really heavy, heavy topic to jump into. So before we go any further into that, tough topics and like just talking about that kind of stuff, I kind of wanted to see your viewpoint
Hmm.
on living in Japan. Like, what are the pros and cons for you? Like, why did you? Well, let's start with this. Why did you start? Uh, why did you decide to move to Japan?
Um, so my mom is Japanese. I grew up coming to Japan every few summers as a kid, and I
Oh,
always
lucky.
really loved it. Yeah, it
Mm,
was really great. I think being a kid in Japan is really great, especially in the countryside.
mm,
You like go out and catch bugs and butterflies, and like even if you don't understand what everyone's saying, like everyone just
right.
eats like delicious food together. And I think like there's level of safety in Japan that allows kids to have a lot more autonomy. So
Mm,
I would just go run around with the neighborhood kids, and the adults wouldn't really hover over us or anything because I think they
right.
just trust that like the older kids will take care of us, and people
Yeah.
in the neighborhood they're not gonna like kidnap anyone. So
Yeah, I can imagine like it's like those movies where like kids are it's the sun is setting, you're like running through the fields and catching butterflies and things like that. Probably not exactly like that, but the
yeah,
feel is
pretty
probably that's
pretty
what it
close,
feels
I'd
like.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
so
Yeah.
I always wanted to move to Japan, or I always wanted to experience like more of that. And I never really lived in Tokyo or got to experience much of Tokyo. So but I really love cities, so I thought I'd move here for like a year and I don't know, work at like Eikaiwa, which is like some sort of like English teaching conversation school, and just like see how it goes, and then move back to the U.S. But I ended up really loving the lifestyle that I could um, just have in Japan compared to the US, which is why I ended up staying here for longer, of course.
Wow. Yeah. How long have you been there for now?
I've been here for about 3.5 years.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah,
And then your original plan was to stay for how long? Like a summer or something like that?
about a year.
A year?
About a year. Hmm.
Wow. Wow. So then it's wow, that's like a big change all of a sudden.
Hmm.
Has your parents been like or family been very supportive, or was it like, oh, you should come back, we miss you kind of thing?
Yeah, so actually, when I went to university in the States,
Hmm.
I went out of state, and then my parents moved to Japan. So they're
Oh.
actually they're in southern Japan in the countryside. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
also almost easier to be
Right.
here because they're closer, and I still have a brother who lives in the U.S., but he can
The
always come
stars
visit.
almost align. It's like
Yeah,
almost perfect. Just
yeah,
you just need your brother to move here now. Has
exactly.
he was he ever like, oh, maybe I'll move too?
Yeah, I think he's spent some time here, and I think he really likes it. But he's also just very invested in his job in the U.S., so it makes it
Okay.
difficult. Yeah.
I see.
Hmm.
Okay. Cool. So then what were the you said when you were here for a year, during that time frame you started to have thoughts of staying longer term.
Hmm.
What kind of influenced those thoughts?
Um, I think yeah, a lot of it has to do with like everything that is going on in the US and has been going on in the US for, I don't know, like years.
Uh-huh.
I I think there's a few things in Japan that, or maybe a few things that are really lacking in the US that are very just common in other industrialized or post-industrial economies, like healthcare. Healthcare is really cheap and affordable and like easy here, and I don't really have to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And Japan is very safe. Japan is like a place that you can just, I, as a woman, I can just go anywhere by myself, like kind of any hour, and feel safe like 95% of the time. And when you're living in the US, and when you grow up in that environment, you don't really realize how much of a stressor that is to always think
Mm-hmm.
about like, how am I going to get home? Like, what time should I leave? Who am I leaving with? Or have
That's
to worry
true.
about like, what if I need to go to the hospital? What if something happens? Like, what
Right.
if I'm between insurance? So those sorts of things, I didn't really realize how stressful they were until I moved to a country where I didn't have to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then also just Japan is, especially Tokyo, is so convenient. So like you can, especially, I mean, before COVID, you could just go to karaoke and you could take the train home. You didn't really have to worry about driving. There's so much to do. There's so much to eat. Um, Eating is like relatively affordable.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
There's like a lot of shopping. There's a lot of like, I don't know, sightseeing. So I feel like there's just a lot to do. And after I'd spent a year in Tokyo, I felt like, I mean, I was working and I was like doing stuff on weekends and definitely seeing a lot of Tokyo, but even just in that year, I hadn't seen most of Tokyo, I felt. So I just
Mm.
feel like there's a lot to explore.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds okay. Okay. There's I'll be right back. I'm gonna go pack my bags and meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really awesome. Yeah, I think that wow, that's a long list of pros.
Mm.
Um, was there like you've been there for 3 years now, and
Mhm.
I know for the first year those were the reasons why and what convinced you to stay in Japan. Was there anything within the 3 years, now that you've lived there for 3 years, that you realize, oh, is a little bit of a con for anyone who's planning to move there?
Mhm.
Like something to look out for, or they may not see on the surface of Japan?
Right. Um, I think a huge con that people don't really think about before they move here is the bureaucracy,
Mm-hmm.
which everyone's like, what do you mean? But there's a lot of paperwork that you have to do and a lot of things that don't really make sense that um, if you're already working a full-time job and you have to like go to these offices during the day, it's like a huge drain to like
Mm.
if you want to switch your license or you want to get your driver's license in like the Japanese system or um, things like that, where you have to like every time you move apartments, you have to register your apartment with the ward you live in, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
unregister from the place you moved from. Which like as an American, that's like, how do I who like why would I do this? And then
Right.
nothing's online. So I think it seems like a small thing. Like in the US, it's like there are, of course, a lot of bureaucracies, but in Japan,
Right.
it's like they really get into more of your life.
Right.
Um, so
It's
there's
like taking it to
that.
the next level kind of
Yeah,
thing.
there's
Yeah.
that. And it's really frustrating, especially if you're like, what does it mean to register my address? And why isn't this online? And like, how come nobody has debit cards?
Right.
Um, so that's a bit of an impediment to like just setting things up here. But
Mm.
I think.
Yeah, it sounds like a
Mm,
lot of paper. So it's like a lot of paperwork,
mhm,
and it's multiple steps
mhm,
upon
mhm,
steps
mhm.
to
And it
get
never
something done.
ends. It never
Yeah,
ends.
it never ends. And I actually heard that a lot of the Japanese paperwork don't even aren't even in English. They don't have like an English
No.
alternative or anything like that.
Yeah.
Can you is there like when did you kind of experience that? And do you speak Japanese and read Japanese, or is it kind of like a less because I'm Chinese, but I can't read Chinese.
Mhm.
Well, a lot of Chinese, and I can speak it. So is it kind of like what kind of level are you?
So when I moved here, I had studied a little bit of Japanese in university,
Hmm.
but I didn't grow up speaking it. So when I
Okay.
moved here, my level was like very, very low. And
Okay.
then my reading and writing was like almost non-existent. I'm
Okay.
getting better. 3 years has definitely helped, but
All
like
right.
I don't really do forms. I don't do Japanese forms without,
Okay.
Google Translate
Okay.
most of the time.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, that's another thing. Is like people don't speak English. So
Uh-huh.
if you have a problem, they always tell you like, oh, just bring a Japanese friend with you, as if like some Japanese person is just gonna like take off a whole Tuesday to like go help you like register a bank account because they don't have like 3 lines in English.
Right.
So
That's a good friend.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, um,
Wow.
yeah.
So then it seems like is there was there a story that you can kind of tell us about like your first time experiencing such a like this paperwork or extensive steps of
Oh,
writing, filling out paperwork.
oh my God, there's so many, but I think I think a lot of people say the immigration bureau is the worst. For me,
Right.
because I'm half Japanese, I'm able to get like a visa a lot easier. So I haven't had to
Mhm.
deal so much with that. But for me, the worst one has definitely been the driver's license center. So I had a U.S. driver's license from Vermont, valid in the U.S., and I moved to Japan, and I wanted to be able to drive here. And so
Mhm.
I go and I research all this stuff online, like how to change your US driver's license to a Japanese one. And you have to bring in all this paperwork. You have to show that you were like paying bills, or you have to show that you lived in the US for 3 months after you got your your like US driver's license.
Okay.
So you have to have like bills and like physical statements and like pieces
Uh-huh.
of mail.
Right.
Um, you have to get it translated by a certain office. So you have to go to this one office just to get the translation, which takes like several hours. It's like all the way on like the east side. You have to just bring in a bunch of paperwork. So I do all this and I go as soon as the driver's license office opens. Um, I get there at like 8:30, 8:45, and there's already a huge line. And
Oh my
I
God.
talk to the guy and he says like, oh, like, sorry, come back another day, we're already like full of appointments. And I'm like, it's like 8:30 in the morning. And he's like, yeah, I know we open at 8:39, but you should have been here at like 8:15.
Oh.
So I went all the way out there. Did all this paperwork. I can't go take this, so you need to take the test, right?
Uh-huh.
So another day I go back. I had to waste a whole day
Right.
of like taking off work and things like that to like just be like, oh, okay, you can't do this. Another day I go back at 8:15, and they're still like, oh, like we're kind of busy today, like we don't know if we can like accommodate you, but wait and we'll see.
Oh my God.
So I wait until 4 p.m., 4:30 p.m., right as they're kind of closing, and
Uh-huh.
they're like, okay, like come with us. I'm like, okay, finally. And I take an eye exam, and then they're like, okay, in 2 months you can come back and we'll schedule you for your like practical driving exam. So I took the 5 minute written test. Literally took
Uh-huh.
like 5 minutes. It's the easiest test. The
Right.
questions, the English translated questions are like, "Are you allowed to run over pedestrians?" And it's like, what?
Yes.
Yeah. So I did that. I did the eye exam. It literally took like 5 minutes, and then they're like, "Okay, come back in 2 months, and then we can
Wow.
schedule you for your exam."
Which would probably take
Yeah,
more
yeah,
time.
but then you go for the exam and it's like half a day of like waiting because you have to wait for everyone else to take the test. You have to be there like ahead of time. And then it's very, very common to fail the test. So the pass
Really?
rate is about 20%
Holy cow.
because the things they fail you on are not really driving ability related, and it's all in a
Uh,
closed circuit. So they'll fail you for things
oh,
like there's kind of like a lot of blogs that I read beforehand to like, what do they care about on this test? That because it's
right,
obviously not like how well you drive.
right.
It's like, do you check underneath the car on both sides before you get into the car to like check for animals? If you don't do that, they might
Uh,
fail you. Do you, I don't know, like as soon as you get in the car, do you like check, 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 check all the mirrors, like buckle in a certain order,
wow.
things like that. So it's just, I think a lot of Japanese bureaucracy is all about like, do you understand how to navigate the bureaucracy rather
Hmm.
than like, can you drive?
Right.
So I failed the test once, and then I had to take it again. Schedule like 2 more months. Take it
Uh-huh.
again. I passed it the second time, and then now that I have it, I don't really have to do that much to renew it. I have to go
Oh,
in
that's
3
good.
years, but that's just
Wow, that's
yeah,
crazy.
and it's like I already had a US driver's license, It's like
Right.
I already
Right.
know how to drive and everyone's recommending to me like, "Oh, like just like go just like just go to driving school in Japan." And I'm like, "I know how to drive. That's not the problem. The problem is this bureaucracy that's driving me crazy."
Right.
So
Oh
I
my God,
just
that's crazy. That
yeah.
it sounds like it took you like half a year to
Yeah, it took a
get
very
your
long
license.
time
Oh my
and
God.
like several days of just wasting sitting in the office. I'd bring a lot of things to work on because I
Right.
was
Right.
prepared. And there's a
Right.
cafeteria in this
Oh, thank God.
driver's license center because they know you're going to be there all day.
Oh my God, that's crazy. Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, that sounds like the DMV in the U.S., but
But on
hundreds times
steroids.
worse. God. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's a good story. I don't. Okay. Maybe I won't pack my bags right away.
Just get your international driver's license before you come.
Yeah, it's a good call. Um, wow. So like I know that a lot of people who, when they go overseas, they go as like a English teacher to teach a certain language, whether it's English or something else. And in Shanghai, it's actually very common too for a lot of international foreigners to go in to teach that as. But I ask around too, and it seems that while most who are teaching English, um, some struggle, pay bills and kind of like get through the day, um, like to pay bills like apartments and whatever it is, and then others kind of once they hit a point, they use the English teaching job as a kind of stepping stone for like whatever, like a architecture job or like a higher position in like a teaching career or whatever it is. Do you see that too? Is that some people may teach for the duration of the time there, but while others kind of use it as a stepping stone for something, a higher paying job or something?
Yeah, I think a lot of people definitely come to Japan to teach.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the easiest way to get in for a lot of native English speakers. And then I think the people who are serious about living in Japan and aren't necessarily interested in teaching or in the field of education, then they will be the ones who will sort of work on their Japanese or work on whatever other skills in order to get a job in a different
Mm-hmm.
field. So I think a lot of people they don't really end up teaching usually for very long. So the industry also has like quite high turnover rate.
Yeah, I see.
So a lot of people use that definitely to yeah as a stepping stone, like you're saying.
Is there a reason why there is a high rate for people moving switching in and out of this English teaching jobs?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people come to Japan because they want to experience Japan. They're
Mm-hmm.
not really not everyone is necessarily interested in working in Japan, right?
I see.
They're here to kind of have fun and like experience Japan and then leave, right?
Right.
So I think what I've noticed is there's like a 1, 3, and 5 year mark.
Uh-huh.
After 1 year, a lot of people will be like, okay, I've seen Japan. I've seen enough of this bureaucracy. I've seen enough of this like social isolation stuff. I'm gonna go
Right.
home.
Right.
So because of that, like a lot of people do like a 1 year teaching contract
Okay.
and then leave. And I think English, like a lot of these like teaching companies are aware of that, that
Mm-hmm.
they're hiring like native English speakers, regardless of if they're like qualified educators or not,
I
understanding
see.
that they will like leave. Um,
I see.
and that's sort of why I think maybe people aren't satisfied with these jobs is because they're not very well paid necessarily
Mm-hmm.
compared to working in like another industry in Japan.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Is that would you say like for a fresh someone who does kind of want to test the waters, does have dreams of moving to Japan permanently, is it safe to kind of say, hey, why don't you come for a year, try to experience what it really is like to live in Japan, work in Japan, and after a year, if you don't feel like you like it, you can go back. Or if you feel like for example, if you feel like you can adapt and feel comfortable in this kind of environment and these social standards, then you can kind of extend your stay and really look into becoming a not really a citizen, because I understand that's really difficult, but like just someone who can live there long term.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Um, I think a lot of people move to Japan with an idea of what they want from Japan.
Hmm.
And then if that idea doesn't match up, they'll be really disappointed. But if you
Right.
come knowing, like, okay, we'll see how it goes, then I think
Yeah.
that's definitely a healthier mindset.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that Japan is definitely a society where you can go, but it's a society where you as a person have to adapt to their like how they work and how they kind of socialize and how they live and things like that. It's not really you forcing Japan as a whole to kind of fit your mold. Is that right?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, it's always tough to kind of I feel like some people when they have dreams of moving to a different country, they don't really they have they go in with the mindset that, oh, it's going to be, I'm going to live the way I want, nothing's really going to change except for me enjoying the other countries, luxuries or convenience and
Right.
the fun aspect, right? Wow, okay.
Yeah, I think.
So
Mhm.
yeah, you
Yeah,
were
I
saying.
think Japan, especially if you visit Japan and travel in Japan,
Mhm.
it gives that impression because everything that's like travel oriented or things that don't involve like renting apartments or like dealing with bureaucracy or dealing with like neighbors who don't like you for no reason,
Right,
right? Like you
right,
don't see that when you're visiting Japan. And I think people they visit Japan, they have a great time. It's a very easy country to get around. Like there's so much food. Like people are very polite. They think that that's the majority of the experience of living in Japan as a foreigner, but that's the experience of traveling. So
right.
I would yeah, I would have that word of caution for people who have traveled to Japan and loved it. Those are definitely like parts of Japan, but there's more that people don't
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, especially like I think in Shanghai as well. Like when you travel, it's great. But then some people don't really get it. But like when you live there, there's so much stuff that you don't really see that's in the back that you once you start living there, it comes to the forefront and you have to deal with it,
Hmm.
and which isn't fun. It's a lot of stress and work and things like that. So it's just like a caution for anyone who's watching or listening that it's not so easy to kind of live long term somewhere else that you're not used to.
Right.
So you mentioned earlier about like people who come here leave because of like social issues in terms of I done a little bit more research and it was like it's easy to be socially isolated or excluded, whether it comes down to race or because you're just a foreigner or maybe even if you were Japanese, if you didn't fit within how the group as a whole socially work, then you get excluded. Have
Yeah.
you kind of experienced that, or can you kind of elaborate on how that works?
Yeah, it's complicated. It depends on who you are and what your expectations are and like how much, social nuance you can pick up, things like that.
Well, let's talk based on like your experience and how it has affected you.
Yeah, so I'm half Japanese, right? I consider myself Japanese. I grew up, being like, oh, like I'm Asian. Everyone's telling me I'm Asian. I'm Japanese, right? So I'm like, oh
Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's who I am. And I
Uh-huh.
think, yeah, my mom took me to Japan a lot when I was a kid, so I felt very connected culturally, even if I didn't really speak the language. And then I moved to Japan, and I think it's kind of interesting the similarities between the experience of being, foreign in the U.S. as an Asian
Hmm.
American, and then being foreign in Japan as someone who's perceived as either white or kind of this like exoticized half person.
Right. Right.
So I think even for like fully ethnic Japanese people who move to Japan from a different country, they might share this experience where they feel like they're Japanese and they feel like, oh, now that they're back in this country that they feel like, they've been told that they belong to for a lot of their life, they can't necessarily fit in because people around them and a lot of Japanese society will tell them like, oh, but you're not really Japanese because of, X, Y, or Z.
Hmm.
And I think that's a very common experience among other like half Japanese people, is that because Japan is so largely, ethnically 100% Japanese, and because social conformity is valued, in Japan. There's a lot of people who feel like they don't fit in, even if they are, Japanese, or they feel like they should belong for some reason or another. And I think for me, I definitely felt that when I came here. I was like, oh, I'm half Japanese, like I'm just like you. And people were like, oh no, you're not at all like me.
Oh
And I was
no.
like, oh, okay. And I'm definitely, there are a lot of big differences just growing up in the US versus growing up in Japan.
Right.
But I think a big part of it is just, for me, being able to like enjoy being in Japan is, understanding and accepting that like Japanese society, or most, Japanese people you run into on the daily, are not going to like accept you as a Japanese person. And I think a lot of half people who come here, they expect that, and then they're constantly disappointed, and they try to fight and fight and fight to get accepted, and you're never going to win that fight. So I think it comes with like accepting to yourself, like, oh, this is who I am, I know my identity. But then also accepting like you can't expect others to accept you, in the way that you want to be accepted necessarily. And
I see.
for me, that also means like I I think a lot of people also try to like make a lot of Japanese friends. They only want to hang out with Japanese people. They want to work on their Japanese. And if you set that expectation, then that's also kind of something that I feel like a lot of people end up being disappointed with, because not everyone can just easily be accepted into Japanese society.
Mm. Have
So
have you experienced like a time where you well I don't know how it is in your kind of line of work, but I've heard from friends that sometimes like there are um, in corporate jobs you have to after work, which is I would assume extremely long hours. You still have to go out with like the team and to kind of like go for drinks with the boss, and that's kind of like if you're not doing that, it's also not like the social norm, so you may get excluded or not get like social benefits or things like that. Have you experienced that, or know anyone who've experienced that kind of?
I think that definitely applies more to Japanese people.
Oh, I see.
Um, like we don't I don't think that culture is strong in like this transient like English teaching community, or
Mm-hmm.
so much so with like people who are seen as international or half or
Okay.
foreign or something like that.
Uh-huh.
But I think like for maybe some of my friends who have studied abroad in the US, and then they come back with more of a Western mentality of
Uh-huh.
not overworking themselves to death, they join a Japanese company and they're still sort of expected to do that. um,
Right.
I think that's definitely more on like the Japanese side.
With the
Um,
Japanese side of things,
yeah,
I
or
see.
people who are in a Japanese, really deeply rooted in Japanese society, or something like that, have to deal with.
Is it do you is it I don't know if you know this, but or would know, but is it, I know it's like it's what we just talked about, it's more focused on the Japanese culture, and how if you were Japanese, I guess born and raised in Japan, you would have those social issues, which is tough. But have you ever experienced, or know anyone who've experienced like they're Asian, or they're American rather, or they're a foreigner in Japan, and they would go to this like corporate job. Do they have to kind of experience that? Are they expected to, or is it kind of like, oh, you're American or you're a foreigner, you don't have to worry about that. You can, or even like if you're a foreigner, you can go home early. It's not, or is it just really all you have to kind of do all this like the Japanese does?
um, I think, at least for me, from my
Mm-hmm.
experience, I think maybe other people's experience is quite different or it varies, but for me, I feel like if you are perceived as foreign, then you get a lot of free passes. Like, I think in that case, you're not really expected to participate in like this drinking culture as much, or
Oh, okay.
um, you can sort of break or bend more rules and people won't try to hold you accountable because they'll be like, oh, you're foreign. So, that's a double-edged sword, right? People will like be like constantly telling you don't belong and etc. But then of course, if you are being loud on the trains or drinking with your friends, people will be like, oh, well, it's just a bunch of foreigners, of course. Even if you're not really supposed to
Right.
do X, Y, and Z,
Right.
people will excuse that. So there are benefits, I think, of also being seen as an outsider.
Right. I hear that the one of the benefits to be a foreigner to be a foreigner in Japan is like they call it like the what is it, the gaijin card, the quote
Yeah, we
unquote
call it the
gaijin
gaijin
card.
card. Yeah. We always say
Can
like it's okay, just play the gaijin card. Like no one will know that you're not supposed to do this
All
thing.
right. Yeah, I hear like one of the people, they're like, oh, I jaywalked and police stopped me, and then they would say, I'm a foreigner. I don't know. Can you direct me where am I or what am I doing? And then they're, oh, he's just a foreigner. You can go. Is it kind of like that kind of experience?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that.
Um, Man, it's like a tug of war with you. Like, I want to go to Japan, but now I don't want. But now with that card, I do kind of want to go.
Yeah, I think if people see you as foreign, they'll drop a lot of social expectations that they might otherwise have, you know.
I see.
They
Okay.
won't expect you to use like keigo, which is like they won't expect you to speak to them in formal Japanese, you know.
Okay.
Even if you speak Japanese, they might
Uh-huh.
not. They'll be like, "Oh, okay, well, she obviously doesn't know like the social intricacies of Japanese language," which I don't, you know. So it's
Right.
like they don't expect that. But if a
Right.
Japanese person were to like, not use this formal level of language, with another Japanese person in a certain social situation, it'd be bad news, you know.
Oh no. Actually, building off of that, have you ever experienced wh- your ti have you ever experienced during your time in Japan like any kind of like discrimination actually in terms of your uh, the fact that you're half and half or your gender or where you're from, things like that?
Um, yeah, I think yeah, there's probably a lot of instances. I gotta think about maybe something specific, but
Yeah.
definitely
I mean,
gender. Gender is a
yeah,
huge thing that's like
yeah.
um, people don't really. I don't, like Japan is like so like I don't know, so
Right.
technologically advanced, right, and so
Yeah.
modernized, but just like gender equality is not really a topic of conversation as much here as like in the U.S. or
Hmm.
Australia, other countries, and that's been really interesting almost to deal with.
Right.
Just because people will be like, "Oh, you're this way because you're a woman," or like you like these
Oh.
things because you're a woman, and like people don't really
Oh.
bat an eye. Like in the U.S.,
Right.
if someone said that to you, you're like, "What? Like, why would you? Do you really think that?"
Yeah,
But in
like what do you
Japan,
mean?
it's like
Yeah.
it's very people will be like, "Oh, wow, you like do design work? Like, do you physically make these things yourself?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's not hard. It's not like I'm like lifting logs,
Right.
And people are like, "Oh,
Rocket
but like
science.
don't you need someone to help you do this?" I'm like, "It's not that hard." And it's
Right.
just like those tiny comments are just like everywhere. And of course
Uh,
that speaks to like bigger, gender inequalities in Japan
right.
on like a
Do you think
political
it's
level and social
yeah?
level.
No, totally. I totally think so. Like, and do you think it's when they say those things, like, do you think that they know, like, it's like an intentional, or they consciously know that they're saying something which is rude, or like something about gender inequality, or is it just it's so baked into how they're brought up and their culture and just their social backgrounds and things like that, that they don't even realize that it's what it is.
Yeah, I think a big part is that it's really baked into the culture, and it's especially because there's such um, such limited outside influence. In that sense, like it's very hard to break out of that mindset. So I think it's just like in the U.S., there's been so many movements challenging, those ideas, but in Japan, it's like less visible. It happens a lot less in general.
Hmm.
So I think people just generally aren't aware. Whereas in the U.S., if someone said something like to me about that, I might be like, "Oh, this person like I wouldn't excuse their ignorance as easily.
Right. Right.
Not that necessarily I excuse it in Japan, but you know.
Yeah, it's definitely a different culture.
Right.
It's hard to kind of
Right.
just like we were talking about earlier. It's hard for you. It's hard for a foreigner to kind of try to change the system from the outside.
Right.
Like if you want to be able to live in Japan comfortably, and I know it's a terrible thing, but sometimes you just have to adapt to it.
Right.
Which double-edged sword, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like moving on, has that been a factor in terms of pay, like in terms of paychecks where you work? Have you ever been denied something because of your gender or things like that?
I think, at least my impression in like the English teaching world is, I'm not really sure because I don't ask my male colleagues like how much they get paid, but I'm pretty sure it's like it's not as varied as in like a bigger Japanese company or something like that. But I definitely know that it's a huge issue in Japan in general. And I think it doesn't just come down to like how much people are paid, but also like who's hired. So the company that I'm working for now, the cram school, it's there's like 3 women on my team of like 15 people.
Wow.
Who are working in like higher education and sort of like training preparing kids for higher education. So I think it's still, even in this like sort of Westernish bubble in Japan, there's still this idea that women are supposed to teach like younger kids, and like women don't really teach like higher level courses or things like that. I think
that's rough.
It's more than just like the pay grades, right? It's about like who's represented at the table, who's invited. Japan has like very, very low percentage of like women in politics, things like that. I think it just pervades every level of society.
Wow, it's crazy. That's a heads up to especially females entering there. It's crazy. Is it have you and I think that there's also like a expectation for women, like once they're pregnant or like if they're married, they get moved off to becoming a housewife, even if they wanted to continue their career or whatnot, right?
Yeah, women are definitely, I think they're often asked to resign, or they can't really take maternity leave and then rejoin the company, which is another huge issue in Japan, is that women leave the workforce.
Right. Wow, this is a heavy topics. Yeah. I feel like it's not even a glass ceiling. It's more of like a concrete roof or something.
Yeah, it's like just concrete box sunk in the ocean.
Yeah. Oh my God. Not funny, guys. Not funny. I don't know why I'm laughing. I'm sorry. Okay. So, and I believe like, I mean, we're both not black or anything like that, but like I had black friends who also told me when they were living in Japan, they also had people kind of deny them entry in the restaurants, or even if you were like if you look Spanish or things like that, they would assume, and if you were like on your own bike, they would assume you stole it or you did something like a negative connotation with your race, which is in the US it's a little bit more unheard of. Well, at least in New York, where I'm from, it's very racist and rude for anyone to assume that. But for Japan, it's just common. It just feels like people just assume. I think that's what it is. I think Japanese people either like to judge, and I'm not talking about as a whole, but like just many like to judge or assume based on your visual like presentation, or like how you dress, how you look, your skin color, how you speak, things like that. So I think that while Japan is definitely very technologically advanced, it seems like there's a lot on the culture side and how they socially react and communicate with other foreigners. There's a lot of work to be done there. So let's let's switch gears because let's talk about some happy things like for for when people we talk about like a lot of people who move to Japan like oh this is there's like gender inequality, there's racism, there is like all these steps you have to go through in terms of paperwork and like all this like negativity, but like um is there like let's go in let's say someone who wants to move to Japan, they heard all this, they're so ready, like oh none of this is phases me, I've racism, I've dealt with that here, I can deal with in Japan, paperwork, no problem, I speak fluent Japanese. Can you give let's go into like actually living in Japan, so like apartments, banking, like what are some of the kind of things that you need if let's say I was gonna move tomorrow. Like, do I need like? Is it very similar in the U.S.? Like, you just need like a 1 month security, 1 month deposit. No, that's what. Okay.
More bureaucracies. All right. So, say you're moving to Japan tomorrow.
Yeah.
You can go through like a share house. Share house is probably the cheapest option, and it's pretty much like a giant apartment where you rent like one room, sometimes with a bathroom included, sometimes a shared bathroom. And you live with like a bunch of people, and I think that's a great way to make friends, meet people, like just hang out, and like not spend too much money on rent. If you're moving into an apartment, the cost is like astronomical to move in for no reason.
Oh
For
wow.
no reason. So I think when I moved into my apartment, we had to pay the equivalent of about 5 months rent up front.
Oh wow.
So there's this thing in Japan called key money, which is just gift money for the landlord, which is sort of it's like this leftover like bureaucratic thing from like the end of World War II, where like housing was really scarce, where you pretty much had to bribe your landlord to let you live somewhere. Of course, that's no longer a problem, but we still everyone pays about 1 month of money to their landlord for no reason that they don't get back. You pay your first month's rent. You pay whatever the prorated rent is. So if I'm moving in the middle of the month, then I have to pay that half as well.
Okay.
You pay about a month of deposit, which you often don't get back because people will charge you for things like made up cleaning fees or I have never met anyone who got all of their deposit back. Usually it's like maybe if you're lucky you'll get half of that back. And then you also have to pay a guarantor fee, which for me, my parents live in Japan, so even though I had a guarantor who was like willing to sign all this paperwork and like could show bank statements, the company that I went through required a guarantor, and that's another 1 month of rent.
Wow.
So you need that before you move in. So it's a huge pain to move, just like financially, because you have to have 5 months of rent, and then like you only have 1.5 of that goes to actual rent.
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah, and then there's maintenance fee. There's just lots of fees, and everything there's lots of fees. So you need to do that. You need to set up a bank account. So yeah, bring a Japanese friend who just is willing to take bank hours off. That's not too difficult. Some branches hypothetically have people who speak English.
I thought you were gonna say some banks have friends for you to hire.
Friends for hire. I feel like that should be a job, just like someone who like goes and helps you open bank accounts. Maybe I should start doing that.
Hey.
Yeah, so you have to set up a bank account. It's kind of like a hassle. They'll give you this thing called the ATM card, which I thought was a debit card, and I tried to use it as a debit card, and I was trying to swipe for something, and they're like, no, you can only use this at the ATM to withdraw money. But you can't use it to actually pay for things. I'm like, why is this not just a debit card? You do that. Yeah. I think those are some of the main things. I don't know, what else do you need to do? Transportation is really easy. You just get a Suica card or a Passmo, like the two main brands here, and you have it on your phone. You can just like tap in and tap out of any station.
And those cards are basically kind of like a credit debit card where you kind of pay for everything.
Yeah, and you can pay for a lot of things at convenience stores too. So I think Japan just sort of missed this whole like pay for things with credit cards, debit cards, and just jumped right into like this transit card you can use at like every convenience store. So that's been getting a lot better in recent years also. That's really
Okay.
convenient. That's really easy to use.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
think in Shanghai, they did that jump too.
mm,
There is credit cards and debit
mm,
cards, but it's really just to WeChat. It's like an
mm,
app, and then you kind
mm-hmm.
of scan it and they pay. So it's very similar. Um, and I hear that like, clothing sizes run way different compared to like American
Yeah,
clothing
yeah. I
size.
think I'm an L here,
Yeah.
and
Oh
I
no.
and I do like modeling work, so I'm just
Yeah.
like, I feel bad
Yeah.
for people who, like even,
Yeah.
regular sized Americans, they come here and it's like it's kind of hard to shop.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
styles are limited and the sizes are definitely very limited.
Yeah, I think my wife likes to shop in like Japanese brands, but it's hard because just aside from the fact that brands in themselves have different sizing, just Japanese sizes are just usually run smaller than American sizes. So it's a lot of trying on and
Mm-hmm.
returning,
Mm-hmm.
and if not, you can't return it, you just kind of live with it.
Yeah.
So that's rough. And then how's like the return policy? Is that like when you're shopping, is there a return policy commonly?
Uh, I don't really know.
Mm.
I think it's my impression is that you can't really return stuff as easily, but I I don't know. I guess I don't really try to return things because I assume it's going to be
Right.
too much of a hassle, just based on other things.
Sign this paperwork,
Sign this paperwork.
bring your friend.
Like, have
Yeah.
an email address, have your address, like, have your bank account number on here just in case,
Yeah, your social number. Yeah.
Yeah, like,
Uh,
I think, like, the
God.
big brands like H&M, Zara, those international brands, they accept returns for sure.
Okay. Okay.
But,
Um, yeah, and is it like we're talking about clothing size,
mm.
but I know that I think I hear that food portions are smaller compared to like an American food portion. Is that something you've experienced, or
I think so.
you've been there for too long?
Yeah, I,
You're
I
too
kind of
assimilated.
forgot. But something they definitely don't do in Japan is you don't really do, like, I'm going to eat half here and take the rest to go.
Okay.
So I think the food portion is more like you're going to eat all of this here, which
Oh,
is something I had to adjust to because I'm the type of person that, like, I like to snack kind of
yeah.
constantly throughout the day. So I'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, can I get this half to go? And they're like, what? No, just like you already you're eating it. Eat it, like just finish it. So there's that.
So I can't finish. No, just finish
Just
it.
finish
But I
it.
can
Finish it.
pull out a samurai sword. Finish it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I've actually heard that too. And when I went to Japan, I actually ordered a huge bowl of ramen without knowing, and then everyone was finishing their bowls around me. But I was like, oh my god, I can't finish this. And then I was looking for a way out, but I was like, oh my. So I just kind of
You just
finished it off,
have
but I
to.
felt so sick
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
so so bad. Wow. Yeah. So, is there wow, we talked about a lot of stuff. We're reaching the end point for this podcast. Um, so for the people who are interested, is there any kind of like quick advice, some tips, recommendations for people who want to move or are thinking about it?
um, One is be prepared for the bureaucracy. And then another thing I think is just like wherever you're moving from, just like leave your ego there. Like, don't expect Japan to be something that caters to you. Don't expect, Japanese people to treat you a certain way. Like, you have to
Mhm.
remember that, like, you are moving to a place that is, um, not necessarily going to be what you're used to. So you can't expect everything to accommodate for you. Of course, you can want things to change and want things to be better, but don't expect that everything is going to be catered to you. And if you can just like let that go and drop that and just sort of try to have a little bit more perspective on living in Japan, I think it's a really enjoyable experience, and there's a lot to do, a lot to see, a lot to eat, and just like it's a good country to live in.
All right, sounds good. Yeah. May not want to live there, but I definitely want to visit again. So that's definitely again on my list. Okay, cool. So if you want people to keep tabs with you or follow you, or if you want to direct them to something, where are some places they can like keep up to date with you?
Sure. Yeah, so you can follow me, I guess, on my socials. My Instagram is Maya Sauce. That's Sause. That's my name.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you want to keep up with sort of my more design work, I also have my handle Kagami Collection. It's Kagami underbar collection, and that's where I have my lamps, things like that.
Um, and actually, we have 5 minutes left. So, do you want to kind of go quickly into like what those lamps are kind of about and things like that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So my lamps are they use washi, which is like Japanese paper,
Uh-huh.
and wood. And the reason I started this is because I was really interested in preserving like this long history of Japanese craft of washi, which is sort of dying. A lot of like traditional industries are struggling to survive and make themselves adaptable. Um, and I really wanted to show a way to re reinvent this material, not reinvent the material, but reinvent uses for the material. And I think that something typically Japan does quite well is like taking something traditional or something from another country and changing it for, to fit the modern world. I think we see that especially in
Mm-hmm.
food. Japan has kind of taken foods from all over the world and made it its own. So that's sort of what I was trying to do, is support these like local, industries that are struggling, and also create something that is Japanese and not Japanese at the same time. Yeah, so that I have a collection of like 4 or 5 or 6 lamps, and they're all just kind of these geometric, boxy shapes that
Mm-hmm.
are covered in this washi. And my goal is that these lamps will give off a very soft sort of light, nothing too harsh, and it's kind of this fusion between Western design and like Japanese materials, which is kind of like how I am as a person, a fusion of these two things. So
Right, right, right.
yeah, I really hope um, that people will see the value of washi again,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah, took a peek too, and it was definitely very aesthetically pleasing. It's very beautiful, and the light that it gives off is like a very ambient light and a
Mm,
very warm light. So it's very good for like a decor piece, but also kind of a functional piece too. So um, I could definitely, I would definitely see it it's just very nice to have around the house. It adds that kind of touch to kind of warmth that some apartments may be like a hard light or something like that. Um, so it's nice.
yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
glad you like them.
Yeah, I do. And I know that you're also currently looking for partners to kind of like sell in the U.S. too, right? So um, maybe if whoever's listening wants to kind of partner up, you can kind of message her on Instagram or through her website, and you guys can work something out. Maybe UrbanCred one day can kind of bring it over, but I think in terms of storage space and things like that, we're kind of packed anyway. But
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the future we can kind of work something out.
Yeah,
Cool, cool. All
cool.
right. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, just thanks so much for having me on here. It was really great to
Yeah,
talk
it
about
was
my
fun. Thank you for
experience.
coming on.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can have a second episode about something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Less heavy topics.
Yeah. Maybe about something a little bit more lighthearted. Yeah, totally. Cool. All right. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no, thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.